The Albuquerque evening was ablaze with color, the desert sun sinking low, painting the sky in hues of tangerine and crimson. Miguel Alvarez, a Latino-American in his mid-40s, gripped the wheel of his sleek black SUV, the hum of the engine a steady rhythm beneath the soft jazz drifting from the radio. His tailored blazer hung neatly on the passenger seat, his tie loosened after a long day at the office. As Director of Internal Affairs for the Albuquerque Police Department, Miguel was no stranger to stress, but today's meetings had left him drained. Endless reports, bureaucratic tangles, and the weight of a job that demanded he hold his own colleagues accountable. He adjusted the air conditioning, craving the quiet of his home, when a yellow light blinked ahead at the intersection of Central Avenue. He eased off the gas, the SUV gliding to a stop just as the light turned red. In his rearview mirror, a sudden flash of red and blue cut through the twilight, followed by the piercing wail of a siren. Miguel's stomach tightened, a familiar not born of too many encounters like this in his younger years. Stops that had less to do with traffic and more to do with the color of his skin. Not again, he thought, his jaw clenching. He pulled over to the curb, rolling down his window as a police cruiser parked behind him. The radio's jazz faded to a low murmur as he steadied his breathing, reminding himself, "Stay calm. You know how this goes." Out stepped Officer Nathan Caldwell, late 30s, with a shaved head and a badge that gleamed under the streetlights. His uniform was crisp, his stride deliberate, exuding the confidence of someone who thrived on control. Caldwell adjusted his belt, his hand lingering near his holster as he approached the SUV. His eyes scanned the vehicle, then locked onto Miguel, sizing him up before he even spoke. "License and registration," Caldwell said, his voice flat but carrying an undercurrent of authority. He leaned slightly toward the window, his posture relaxed but his gaze sharp, like a predator waiting for a misstep. Miguel nodded, his movements slow and deliberate. He reached for his wallet, then the glove compartment, careful not to make any sudden moves. Don't give him a reason, he thought, though he knew from experience that reasons could be invented. He handed over his driver's license and registration, his expression neutral but his mind racing. What's his angle? The light? Something else? Caldwell took the documents, his eyes flicking between the papers and Miguel's face, searching for something to latch onto. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Caldwell asked, his tone probing, almost daring Miguel to argue. Miguel kept his voice even, his dark eyes meeting Caldwell's without flinching. "Not really, officer. I stopped at the light." Caldwell's lips twitched, a faint smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "You didn't come to a complete stop," he said, though his words lacked conviction, as if he were testing the waters. "Rolled through just a bit." Miguel's brow furrowed, a flicker of irritation rising in his chest. He'd stopped, he knew he had, but he swallowed the urge to argue, knowing it would only escalate things. "I thought I stopped in time," he said, his tone polite but firm. "But I hear you." Caldwell didn't respond immediately. Instead, he lingered, his eyes narrowing as he studied Miguel more closely. He's not buying it, Caldwell thought, his instincts buzzing. Guy's too calm, too polished. Something's off. The officer's posture shifted, his shoulders squaring as if the stop had just become more than routine. He glanced at the license in his hand, his fingers tightening around it. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked, his voice taking on a sharper edge. Miguel paused, a fraction of a second, weighing his response. Here we go, he thought, recognizing the shift in tone, the subtle pivot from traffic violation to something personal. "I've lived here 2 years, he said evenly. "My address is on the license." Caldwell barely glanced at the document. His questions were no longer about the stop, they were about Miguel. "Were you headed in such a hurry?" he asked, leaning closer, his voice laced with suspicion. "Just home," Miguel replied, his calm unshaken but his patience thinning. He's fishing, he thought, looking for a reason to push this further. The air between them thickened, the tension palpable. Caldwell wasn't seeing a driver anymore. He saw a target, someone who didn't fit his mental checklist of who belonged in a sleek SUV on this side of town. Miguel sensed the shift, But he didn't flinch. His composure wasn't naivety, it was control honed over years of navigating situations just like this. Caldwell stepped back, folding Miguel's documents with exaggerated slowness before tucking them into his chest pocket. His expression hardened, the smirk now unmistakable. He thinks he's slick, Caldwell thought, his frustration mounting. Let's see how he handles this. Step out of the vehicle, he ordered, his voice cutting through the evening air. Miguel's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his knuckles whitening for a brief moment. So that's the game, he thought, his mind flashing to past stops, to the indignity of being treated like a suspect for no reason. But his face betrayed none of it. Is there a specific reason for that, officer? He asked, his tone measured, testing the waters. Caldwell's eyes narrowed, his patience fraying. I said step out, he snapped, his hand drifting closer to his holster. You don't want to make this harder than it needs to be. The threat hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. Miguel exhaled slowly, his mind racing. He's escalating because he can, because he thinks I'll fold. He opened the door and stepped out, standing a little taller than Caldwell, his broad shoulders filling out his crisp white shirt. His polished shoes gleamed under the streetlights, his demeanor professional but unthreatening. Yet none of that seemed to matter to Caldwell, whose eyes flicked over him, sizing him up like a threat. Hands where I can see them, Caldwell said, gesturing toward the front of the SUV. Up against the hood. Miguel complied, his movements deliberate, but he couldn't resist a pointed question. Looking for something specific, officer? He asked, his voice calm but laced with challenge. Incidents involving guys in suits driving SUVs? Or is this about something else? The question landed like a jab. Caldwell's jaw twitched, his composure slipping. Who does this guy think he is? He thought, his hand hovering near his belt, more reflex than necessity. Watch your tone, he growled, his voice hardening. You seem pretty comfortable with this. Got something to hide? Miguel let the silence stretch, his eyes locking onto Caldwell's. He's rattled, he thought. Good. No, officer, he said finally. I just value clarity in situations like this. Transparency, you know? Caldwell scoffed, pacing a small circle in front of the SUV. This guy's too smooth, he thought, his gut telling him something was off. Most people would be nervous, stammering, but Miguel was calm, too calm. It threw him off balance, and he didn't like it. You're awfully confident, Caldwell muttered, almost to himself. Like you think you're in control here. Miguel tilted his head slightly, his voice steady. Confidence isn't the issue, officer. Respect is. Caldwell froze, the word respect, hitting like a slap. His smirk vanished, replaced by something sharper, almost defensive. Respect? From this guy, he thought, his pride stinging. He opened his mouth to retort, but the words didn't come. The dynamic was shifting, and he was losing his grip. Instead of backing off, he doubled down. Turn around, hands on the hood, he barked. I'm checking for weapons. Weapons? Miguel repeated, his tone incredulous but controlled. He's grasping now, he thought, a flicker of anger rising in his chest. Do I look like I'm carrying a weapon? Caldwell's eyes narrowed, his composure cracking. I'm not asking again. Miguel hesitated, a storm brewing behind his calm exterior. This is what they do, he thought. Push until you break, then use your reaction against you. But he wasn't that young man anymore, the one who'd been shaken by these encounters. He turned, placing his palms flat against the hood, the metal cool under his hands. Caldwell approached, his boots crunching on the asphalt. The pat-down was rough, Caldwell's hands lingering longer than necessary, an attempt to provoke. But Miguel didn't flinch, didn't stiffen, didn't give him the reaction he wanted. You're clean? Caldwell muttered, stepping back, his tone begrudging, as if disappointed he'd found nothing. Of course I am, Miguel said, turning to face him, his eyes sharp. Now, officer, are we done? Not yet, Caldwell shot back, his voice rising, betraying his need to stay in control. You seem to know a lot about how this works. Care to explain why? Miguel folded his arms. His posture relaxed despite the crackling tension. He's desperate to justify this, he thought. I've had enough run-ins with law enforcement to learn a thing or two, he said. Let's just say I'm familiar with the process. Caldwell's eyes narrowed further. What, you a lawyer or something? Miguel's lips curved faintly, a hint of amusement breaking through. Or something. The ambiguity infuriated Caldwell. He stepped closer, invading Miguel's space, his voice dropping to a growl. You think you're smarter than me? Think you can talk your way out of this? Miguel met his gaze, unflinching. He's losing it, he thought, sensing the officer's unraveling confidence. I don't think anything, officer, he said. I just expect fairness. And right now, I'm not seeing much of it. Caldwell bristled, the word fairness striking a nerve. People like you always... He stopped, the words catching in his throat as he realized he'd gone too far. People like me? Miguel repeated, his voice soft but charged with meaning. There it is, he thought, the truth laid bare. Care to finish that thought? Caldwell stepped back, his face reddening. You know what I mean, he muttered. But his conviction was gone, his authority crumbling under Miguel's steady gaze. I think I do, Miguel said, his calm now a weapon, cutting through Caldwell's pretense. And I think we both know this stopped being about a traffic violation a long time ago. Caldwell opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time, he looked uncertain, like a man who'd stepped into a trap he hadn't seen coming. The balance of power had shifted, and he was on shaky ground. But the real reckoning was yet to come. Miguel's voice broke the silence, steady and commanding. Officer, I think it's time you know who I am. Caldwell's brows knitted, his irritation flaring. I don't care who you are, he snapped, but his voice cracked, betraying his unease. Miguel reached into his pocket, his movements slow and deliberate. I'm getting my badge, he said, watching Caldwell's hand twitch near his holster. No need for that. I want you to see it. He pulled out a leather wallet and flipped it open, revealing a gleaming badge. Miguel Alvarez, he said, his tone as casual as if he were introducing himself at a community event. Director of Internal Affairs, Albuquerque Police Department. Caldwell froze, his eyes darting to the badge, then back to Miguel's face. No way, he thought, his mind scrambling. This guy? Internal Affairs? He searched for a sign it was a joke, but Miguel's expression was unyielding, his authority radiating like heat. Internal Affairs? Caldwell repeated, his voice barely audible. That's right, Miguel said, his tone carrying quiet power. My job is to ensure officers uphold the integrity of this badge. And right now, you're falling short. Caldwell's face paled, his bravado collapsing. He took a step back, his hand falling from his belt as if it burned. I'm screwed, he thought, the weight of his actions crashing down. Miguel stepped forward, closing the gap. The problem isn't just the profiling, though that's bad enough. It's not even the escalation. It's that you assumed I wouldn't know my rights, that I wouldn't challenge you. Why? Because I don't fit your idea of someone who deserves respect. Caldwell's shoulders slumped, Miguel's words hitting like a sledgehammer. He glanced at the badge again, as if it might disappear. Miguel's voice softened, but the edge remained. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to hand back my documents and think very carefully about what you say next. Caldwell hesitated, his pride warring with the reality sinking in. I can't back down now, he thought, but his hands betrayed him, trembling as he pulled Miguel's license and registration from his pocket. He handed them over, his eyes avoiding Miguel's. Miguel took them, tucking them away, then stepped toward his SUV. He paused, glancing back. You'll hear from me again, Officer Caldwell. Not as the guy you pulled over, but as the man who decides if you're fit to wear that badge. As Miguel slid into his SUV and started the engine, Caldwell stood frozen in the fading light, his confidence shattered. What did I just do? He thought, his mind spiraling. For Miguel, the drive home was quiet, but his thoughts were loud. This isn't just about Caldwell, he thought. It's about the system that lets him think this is okay. He'd seen it before, officers who wielded their badges like weapons, unchecked by a culture that turned a blind eye. But this time he had the power to act. The next morning, Miguel sat at his desk in the Internal Affairs office, the desert sun streaming through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. A file lay open before him, Officer Nathan Caldwell. His record wasn't clean. Minor complaints of unprofessional conduct, questionable stops, vague misunderstandings that had been quietly resolved. Pattern, Miguel thought, his fingers drumming on the desk. He's not the problem. He's a symptom. Caldwell was one officer, but the culture that emboldened him was the real issue. And Miguel wasn't here to slap wrists, he was here to rebuild. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. His assistant, Rosa Martinez, stepped in, her arms full of reports. "Morning, Mr. Alvarez," she said, setting the stack on his desk. "Here's the latest on last month's misconduct cases. Also, Chief Romero wants a heads-up on the department review next week." "Thanks, Rosa," Miguel said, his voice steady but his mind still on Caldwell. He glanced at the files, then back at her. "Can you set up a meeting with the chief for this afternoon? There's something I need to discuss." Rosa raised an eyebrow, sensing the weight in his tone. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice soft. Miguel offered a faint smile. "Just another day in internal affairs," he said, but his eyes told a different story. Rosa nodded and left, closing the door behind her. Miguel turned back to Caldwell's file, but his thoughts drifted to the broader implications. How many others are out there like him? He wondered. How many stops like last night happen every day, to people who don't have a badge to flash? The memory of his own past encounters. Being pulled over as a teenager, frisked for no reason, treated like a suspect before he'd even spoken, stirred a quiet anger. He'd climbed the ranks to change that, to hold the system accountable. But last night proved how far they still had to go. That afternoon, Miguel sat across from Chief Elena Romero in her office, the walls lined with commendations and photos of her shaking hands with city officials. Romero, a seasoned leader with a sharp gaze and graying hair pulled into a tight bun, leaned back in her chair, listening as Miguel recounted the traffic stop. His voice was steady, but his passion was unmistakable. "I could have written it off as a bad day for Caldwell," Miguel said, his hands clasped on the table. "But that's how this festers. His behavior wasn't a one-off, it's a reflection of gaps in our training, our oversight, our culture." Romero sighed, rubbing her forehead. "Caldwell's been a problem before," she admitted, her voice low. "Nothing major, small complaints, overzealous stops. We've handled it internally, kept it quiet." "That's the issue," Miguel said, leaning forward. "Quiet doesn't fix anything. It buries it. We need to be louder, Elena. We need to show the community we're serious about accountability." Romero met his gaze, the weight of his words settling in. "You're talking about a fight, Miguel," she said. "This won't just ruffle feathers. It'll burn bridges." "Good," Miguel said, his voice resolute. "Some bridges need burning." Romero studied him for a moment, then nodded. "What's your plan?" "A department-wide review," Miguel said without hesitation. "Not just individual officers, but our systems, training, protocols, how we handle complaints. We need to root out the biases that let someone like Caldwell think he can profile without consequence. And we need to listen to the community, not just talk at them." Romero leaned forward, her hands clasped. "This is big, Miguel. You'll have enemies. Cops who think you're betraying the badge. Politicians who don't want the headlines." "I've got enemies already," Miguel said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Comes with the job. But if we don't hold ourselves to a higher standard, who will?" Romero exhaled, a flicker of admiration in her eyes. "All right," she said. "You've got my support. But you'd better be ready for the storm." "I am," Miguel said simply. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Miguel threw himself into the work, compiling data, reviewing officer records, and organizing community forums. At one forum, held in a packed community center, He stood before a diverse crowd. Families, activists, retirees, all with stories of distrust. A young woman, Maria, shared her experience of being stopped repeatedly while driving to her nursing job. "They see my last name, my face, and assume I'm trouble," she said, her voice trembling. Miguel listened, his heart heavy but his resolve stronger. This is why, he thought. This is what we're fighting for. Back at the department, tensions rose. Some officers saw Miguel's review as a witch hunt, whispering about internal affairs throwing us under the bus. Others, quietly, supported him, tired of the bad apples tainting their work. Caldwell's hearing was a flashpoint. Miguel sat across from him in a stark conference room, the officer's face pale, his bravado gone. "I didn't mean anything by it," Caldwell muttered, avoiding Miguel's gaze. "It was just a stop." "It was never just a stop," Miguel said, his voice calm but unyielding. "You profiled me. You escalated without cause. And you thought you'd get away with it." Caldwell was suspended, but Miguel knew punishment wasn't enough. The real victory was in prevention, rewriting training protocols, mandating bias awareness, and creating a transparent complaint system. Months later, Miguel stood at a podium in a packed auditorium, addressing officers, city officials, and residents at a community event. The room buzzed with anticipation, the air thick with hope and skepticism. "Justice isn't just about catching criminals," Miguel said, his voice resonating through the hall. "It's about integrity, fairness, and respect for every person we serve. That's the badge I believe in, and that's the badge we're building together." The applause was thunderous, but Miguel's eyes scanned the crowd. Some faces wary, others inspired. Change is slow, he thought, stepping down from the podium. But it's coming. A young officer approached him afterward, nervous but earnest. "I want to do better," she said. "How do we start?" Miguel smiled, the weight of the past months lifting slightly. "Listen," he said. "Really listen. To the community, to each other. That's where it begins." As he left the auditorium, the desert stars glittering above, Miguel felt a quiet certainty. The road ahead was long, but for the first time he saw a path forward. And for now, that was enough.